denizens of the night. Welcome to another episode of the macabre, the terrifying. Broadcasting live from the rising floodwater in your basement, I will be your guide through the witching hours. Tonight, we'll hear the second half of A.G. Hilton's story, Floods. In the first half, we're introduced to Jonathan, his wife Elaine, and their two kids, Nathan and Naomi. They are settling into their new house with the help of their friendly neighbor, Mr.Paine. But a powerful storm is rolling through the area where they live, and upriver there has been an accident with a shipping container carrying strange cargo. Now, everyone is hunkered down in their houses, and as the power flickers and Mr. Paine becomes aware that one of the neighbors has been murdered, it becomes clear that high water isn't the only threat. This is part 2 of the story Floods, which was written by A.G. Hilton. Mr. Paine felt numb as he sat in the darkened living room, the void of the blank TV screen staring back at him. He tried to tell himself that everything was still all right. Surely, with all the panic and chaos of the weather, he hadn't understood all that Miss Bettery had been trying to describe. Of course, something had happened across the river, but maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Yet he knew this was a lie. The feeling told him as much. In fact, the feeling told him the bad news was only getting started. He found himself thinking of that new family down the road as another crash resounded outside. Looking out the window, he waited for the next illuminating flash of lightning to show him the score. He did not have to wait long. The road outside was now a tangle of fallen trees and power lines.
"Mommy, why did the lights go out? Is the storm gonna get us?"
Elaine tried not to let the small spark of panic within her show as she gave Naomi a comforting squeeze. "Don't be scared. The nasty old storm just knocked out the power, that's all. We're still safe and sound, okay?"
"Oh, okay."
The little girl seemed less than convinced. Elaine went to the kitchen and dug through the designated catch-all drawer until she found a small flashlight. "You take this," she said, handing it to Naomi. "You want to be the big sis and help out? Go sit with your brother and keep an eye on him. I have to talk to Daddy real quick." Jonathan emerged from the dark basement and closed the door behind him. She didn't like the look on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked in a low tone. "Something hit the glass door down there. One side is completely busted." She swore quietly. "What was it? A tree limb?" "I'm not sure. There wasn't anything obvious there. Maybe it blew away, but..." He looked back to the basement door. "I don't know. Looked almost like something tracked some water inside. I didn't get to look around much before the power went, but I did my best to patch it up." She felt sick. She tried to keep telling herself that it was fine. The rain would stop soon, and they would pick up the pieces. But her well of optimism seemed to run dry. "The water's getting pretty high. Do you think we need to get out of here?" Jonathan went past her to the front of the house, looked out the window. He stood there with his hands against the glass until lightning flashed, leaving him in silhouette. She heard him whisper something acrid. "What is it?" "The road," he said. "Looks like there are trees down all across it. Power poles are down. I see lines tangled everywhere."
You said you thought we could make it on foot if it came to it. Yeah, but I wasn't counting on all that being in the way. Shit, I don't know anything about those power lines. What if there's still some juice in them somehow? And that wind. What did the last forecast say? Maybe it'll stop. Maybe this is the worst it'll get. Maybe. If it comes to it, I still think trying to make it to Paine's is the only option. I'll do everything I can to get you and the kids through out there. But maybe we'll sit tight for now. Who knows? There could be a break in things soon. He took her in his arms and gave her a reassuring squeeze. Let's get some go bags packed and just have them ready. Make a game out of it for the kids. Try to keep them calm. They dug out every flashlight and battery-powered source of illumination they could lay hands on. The effect was a fire-like luminescence of dancing shadow, wherein they gathered essentials and packed them in backpacks and some small pieces of luggage. When it was all said and done, they piled their things in the kitchen and huddled together on the couch. With the lost sleep the night prior and the constant worry over the worsening weather, one by one they nodded off as the day wore away. All except for little Nathan. Nathan had lost out on no sleep, and being cooped up all day, he did not doze as his siblings and parents. While they slept, he stood and toddled about until making his way to the window. "Water," he gurgled at the roiling current below the window. He pressed his face against the glass and looked on. Earlier, he had seen something out there. It had made him so excited. It reminded him of the thing he'd found under the rock in the creek, but no one else seemed to be interested when he'd tried in his way to tell them. Then he heard a creaking as of a door slowly opening, and stealthy sounds from the kitchen. Inquisitive as always, he toddled across the living room, past his oblivious family, and toward the source of the noise. The kitchen was dark now. The lights which had illuminated it turned out to save the batteries. So it was that he only saw a pale glistening of some shape rooting through the things piled on the floor as lightning flashed in the window. "Alamander?" he asked. The glistening shape turned with a hiss. Again, black water. Again, icy cold. Jonathan fought that old fight against the entanglement under the boat, only this time he kicked free in short order. Rather than surfacing, he plunged deeper. Then he saw Nate, his feet tangled in their own entrapment as he hung suspended in the dark water. His frightened eyes lighted on Jonathan's, and despite being underwater, he screamed. The scream rang through Jonathan's subconscious, ripping him from that black depth of nightmare into the gloom of the living room. And the scream went on until he realized it was not from his dream, nor was it Nate screaming. It was little Nathan. Jonathan came off the couch with a cry of his own before he could come fully awake. Elaine got to her feet, casting her eyes around in the darkness of the house while trying to comfort a startled Naomi. He left them there and ran in the direction of the scream. A commotion came from the kitchen. Something thumping, something else overturned, and more wailing. But when he made it to the kitchen, it was empty. The go-bags had been tossed about, their contents thrown around as if someone had rooted through them. A glass had fallen from the counter, scattering shards on the floor, a floor which glistened with something that was not water. His shoe slipped on the hardwood surface, and he knew it must be the same ooze from the broken basement door. This and more he took in within a matter of seconds. His heart pounded, His head thrummed in a flurry of half-awake confusion. Nevertheless, his thoughts focused on one thing: get Nathan. It was then he looked through the kitchen, saw the open basement door, and realized the cries were now echoing up from below. Elaine called after him, but he barely heard her. Taking a small flashlight from the kitchen detritus, he made for the stairs and froze halfway down them as he smelled wetness and heard a lapping of liquid on stone. The basement was full of water. Elaine called after him from above. Naomi's own crying picked up in intensity, and another frenzied scream from his boy still echoed from somewhere in the blackness of the basement. But God damn it, he froze looking at all that water. The flooding must have made it up the hill. Dazedly, he noticed that his makeshift barrier had been disturbed. At last, Jonathan galvanized himself into motion and made it to the bottom steps. The water swallowed his feet and rose up nearly to his knees. Then he was splashing around. He swung this way and that as he felt beneath the murky surface, all the while calling out his son's name. But this time, he was not answered by a fearful cry. This time, there came a chuffing bellow, muted and distant. Whirling, he brought the flashlight beam to the Stygian blackness behind the basement steps. The crawl space door hung ajar, and a gaping hole stood open just to the side. Part of the door's frame was broken, almost as if having been dug away by something. He made his sloshing way to the hole. Yes, there were score marks at the edge of the wooden crawlspace door, as if something had raked against it. There was more of the slimy stuff, too. And one final oddity. The stone hole which bordered the hanging door looked not as if it had been knocked in by a great force, but smoothed away at the edges, as if partially melted. Into that gaping hole, he shined his flashlight. A smell of decay reached him, and he saw what looked like blood just within the opening. But before he could fall to despair, he heard it again, a soft crying somewhere in that darkened space. Jonathan grabbed the edge of the opening, and, before his throbbing heart and frightened mind could dissuade him, climbed into the reeking hole. "Jonathan? What's happening?" No response from the open basement door. She tried to walk toward it, but was held back by small arms around her leg. "Mommy, don't!" Naomi wailed. "Don't go! Don't go!" Elaine knelt and took the girl's tear-streamed face in her hands. "It's okay. It's okay. I really need you to be the big sis now." "Is Nathan gone?" the little girl asked. "Is Nathan gone like Uncle Nate?" Elaine had to fight to keep her thoughts from spiraling. She had no clue what was happening, only that there had been that scream and Jonathan's plunge through the house and into the basement. Where was her son? Oh, dear God, what had happened? When she spoke, it took effort to keep the tremor from her voice. "Daddy and I are taking care of it, but we need you to be brave and help us, okay? Can you be in charge of this flashlight?" Naomi sniffled and wiped at her eyes, but nodded in agreement and accepted the offered light. Then there came a thumping, as of something moving against the wooden floor from below. Naomi screamed anew, and the motion below became frenzied. Something seemed to be striking and clawing from beneath the hard wood. She couldn't understand what she was seeing. Something like steam began to rise from the battered section of floor, as if there were a fire on the other side. No, it was not burning. Rather, it seemed to be weakening and dissolving. And as the floor sizzled and hissed, something began trying to dig through. That first plunge into the hole sent Jonathan reeling back to his nightmare. The darkness of the crawl space pressed close, and the cloying air stole his breath. Get your head on straight. Gotta keep going. Gotta go deeper this time. The vapor barrier lining the earthen floor of the space was torn in several areas. His hands and knees sank into wet earth, and it seemed that either water was getting in here or had been tracked in. Tracked in by what? Only when he began his half-blind crawl into the guts of the house did the notion that something was to blame for this really set in. Granted, he hadn't seen it, but he knew now something had broken in through the basement. The same something which had taken his son. The same something which had to be in here right now. It felt insane thinking in those terms, but what of that weird bellow he'd heard just before climbing in? Don't think about it. Get your boy. He shined the flashlight ahead. The space was interrupted by support beams at regular intervals, which obscured his line of sight. Nathan? The call came out much weaker than he'd hoped, suppressed by the fear of something else listening. But it worked. He heard that little voice somewhere out in the dark crying again and started forward. He stopped just as suddenly, for something inside him whispered, "Down!" He followed the command on instinct, and as he covered the flashlight and pressed himself to the earth, something moved in the darkness ahead. He couldn't make it out, his flashlight beam suppressed as it was, but still he perceived something almost uncoiling in the blackness beyond. Whatever it was moved away to a different area. He knew he had to proceed. Wherever that shape in the darkness had just come from sounded like where the boy was. But that thing... All at once he heard more screaming from the girls above and the sound of splintering wood from the direction the thing had gone. He'd have to get out of here and back to the girls quick. But for now, it seemed like the distraction he needed, and he hurriedly crawled toward the darkened corner of the crawl space. When it began to come through the floor, Elaine found that she could not move. To this point, her only concerns had been for very dangerous but very understood causes. That a tree might crush the roof, that the floodwater would reach them, that lightning might strike the property. These were frightful things, but they were known quantities. What came through the kitchen floor had no such known comparison. Something like a hand came first. Webbed and hooked with thick talons, it broke through a section of wood and scrabbled about, leaving score marks in the floor and a coating of clear slime. The arm to which it was attached was pale as a fish's belly and rippled with strength. What disturbed her most was the almost human shape to it. When no more than the alien appendage could fit through, the thing withdrew. There came a hawking noise from the hollow cavity, and a green substance splatted through, immediately beginning to react with the surfaces it touched, like a dissolving acid. Furious digging followed the spray, and the weakened wood gave way as something heaved itself partially through the widened gap and brought a muscly torso into view. Naomi screamed. Elaine's mouth dropped open. At the sound of the scream, a pale head with a rictus grin of sharpened teeth jerked their direction, on a flexible neck slitted with gills. That head was plated with sturdy bone, which ran from the snout to the back of the head. It had no eyes, or rather, it had shallow pits in the sides of its head where the vestigial remains of what might have been eyes in generations past stared blindly. Yet, sightless as it seemed, it looked right at them and bellowed. "Run, baby!" Elaine shouted as she shoved Naomi out of the kitchen door. "Get out of here!" "It's me! I'm coming, buddy!" Jonathan neared the source of the small cries when he slipped. He caught himself, but his hand came down into something soft, which was not the earth. He turned the flashlight onto his hand, saw it covered in blood, and then looked to the source. An old woman sat, mouth agape, eyes staring, against the backside of the support beam he just passed. She had been thoroughly gutted. His hand had just been in the open cavity of her stomach. He swallowed the scream and the vomit which bubbled up at the sight and pressed on. He had no time for questions or hesitation. There came more screaming from above, and that thing bellowed not far away. The time was short. But as he reached the dark corner, he felt the fear and sickness lessen in a small measure. For, sat in the corner, seemingly caught in a great amount of that sticky substance, was his boy. He was bruised and scraped, but he was alive. Wasting no time, Jonathan began digging at the slimy substance around Nathan. The strange secretion had partially hardened, but not so much as to not be broken with enough effort. He pulled ropey bits away, and as he did, he took in the surrounding area as illuminated by his flashlight. The gooey stuff extended from Nathan's position and coated everything in this corner. Pockets of it bulged with tiny white sacks. When the light passed over them, small shapes flittered within. He paid them no mind. I got you, buddy." The little boy was silent, as if all capacity to cry had been lost. He only shook quietly as Jonathan took him in his arms. Then, with his son clasped against him with one arm and the flashlight held in the other hand, he crawled back to the entrance. As he turned, one of the little sacks split open, and a tiny mewling thing emerged to fall to the ground. He crushed it under his knee as he went. The thing roared and flailed, but seemed not quite able to fit through the jagged opening that had been created. Seeing what might be a moment of opportunity, Elaine grabbed a cast-iron pan from a nearby cabinet and put herself between the slimy monstrosity and her daughter, intending to come up behind and brain the thing if she could. But the sightless monstrosity seemed to sense her intentions. Even as she planted her feet, it swung out with one of its long arms in a backhand motion and whipped around further than a normal skeletal structure would seem to allow. The blow caught her and threw her back as she lost her grip on the pan. As she fell, she expected to see her blood running onto the floor, but mercifully she had not been sliced by those claws. The thing howled in frustration and lowered itself partially back into the hole before ripping more boards free with its next upward thrust. It was coming through. As it turned on her, she found herself frozen in its blind gaze like shocked prey. But the thing paused, cocking its head as if hearing something far away. It let loose a frantic bellow and withdrew back beneath the floor. As Jonathan slipped free of the crawl space, a roar echoed from behind him. It made him quicken his step. but the water had risen during his short time in the crawl space, so that now he had to wade toward the basement stairs. He tried not to think about the rising water or whatever was playing havoc in the crawl space, but images of being dragged beneath the house while the water encroached kept replaying in his mind. He had to focus on the stairs. If he could make it there, they would be in the clear. Like an answered prayer, there came a light shining down the steps. Elaine followed behind, sweeping the beam of her flashlight across the flooding room until it found them. "Oh my God, Jonathan, is Nathan?" "He's okay. We have to hurry. Something is..." Splash. He should have kept going, but the noise caused him to turn just in time to see the thin tip of what might have been the tip of a tail as it emerged from the hole in the wall and disappeared beneath the water. The sight sent a spike of galvanizing fear through Jonathan as he splashed the final feet toward the bottom of the steps. "Elaine! Take him! I think..." Something had him by the ankle. Just as Elaine took the shaking child from his arms, it jerked him violently back and down beneath the water. It dragged him around, held him beneath the surface. Perhaps it knew nothing more was required to kill its hapless prey. Panic drowned his mind, just as the water threatened the same to his body. He was back to that horrible afternoon a year prior, as if the swallowing blackness of the lake had been waiting for him here all along. It seemed inevitable. A fate escaped once, and now leaping at another chance to have him. And yet he heard voices. Though they were muffled by the water, he heard his wife calling his name, heard what might have been Naomi wailing in the background. He had failed once. He wouldn't do so again. Twisting and kicking at his unseen assailant, he was able to break loose as his shoe came free. He surfaced then, coughing and spluttering as he tried to get his bearings. He'd been pulled to the far side of the basement, and the stairs looked miles away. And between him and the stairs, he saw the rippling motion of the thing as it prowled just beneath the water's surface. "Jonathan!" Elaine screamed. He gained his feet, using the nearby workbench for support. And as his hand came down on it, it found something reassuring there, the handle of Mr. Paine's axe. He took it up and was amazed at how simply having a weapon in hand caused some of that blind panic to melt away. He looked to Elaine then, saw the realization dawning on her face. "Take the kids and go! Go for Mr. Paine's place!" "Jonathan, you can't... Get the hell out of here! You have to go! I'll be right behind you! But you need to take the kids now!" He had no time to see if his words were heeded. Amid the swirling water, a horrible face, up from some sunless depth, emerged. Jagged teeth parted, and a vile spray issued from its jaws. Jonathan ducked most of the stuff, but some landed on his arm and began hissing on his sleeve. He tore loose from the shirt, but nevertheless felt burning at multiple points on his upper arm. Then it sprang at him, all furious, bunched muscle, primed for violence. Elaine guessed at her husband's intentions as soon as she saw him take up the axe. But she couldn't abandon him, especially not here with this awful thing. And yet, Naomi continued to cry at the top of the stairs, and her little boy, oh, thank God her boy was alive, trembled in her arms. Who knew how he'd been hurt or when they could seek medical attention? Jonathan was doing this for them, buying them time. She would not let his effort be in vain. She held Nathan close as she ran up the stairs and took Naomi by the hand. "Hold the flashlight for us, baby."
What about Daddy?"
"He's coming." She forced herself to press on and not look back toward the sounds of chaos from below. "But we have to go right now, okay? We're gonna have to go outside. It'll be scary, but you're brave. You're the brave big sis." She pulled her daughter along toward the front door, and then they were out, exchanging one chaos for another. The outside world screamed at them. All around was naught but sheets of rain, driven by a wind which whipped through the darkness. "Don't let go of me, baby!" Elaine screamed above the howl. "Keep holding my hand and we'll be all right." With the road so obstructed by debris, their progress was slow and made slower by her need to carry Nathan. Once or twice, she feared the wind would rip her children from her, but she clenched and held to them with all her might. How far had they come? How much further to the other house? She couldn't tell. A tree in the darkness, seeming as wide around as she was tall, lay across the path before them. "Come on, baby. We have to climb over. Can you climb?" The little girl did her best, her mother pushing her with a helping hand. As she was over the top, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. And amid that thunder, she heard an all too familiar bellowing. She looked back, and beneath another jolt of white light from the heavens, saw the loathsome thing coming up from behind. "Oh, dear God. Jonathan!" The flash revealed the thing in its full, putrid glory. Its powerful and disturbingly human upper torso tapered away to a whip-like tail. It had no hind legs, merely a short pair of flippers, which were now drawn up close to its body as it slithered forward using its powerful arms for propulsion. With some small satisfaction, she saw many wounds about its body. The axe was planted in its back just behind the left shoulder. Something like that shouldn't have been fast on land, but it was, and it was coming straight for her. She didn't know what the right move was, but her instinct told her to prioritize getting the kids out of the way. She hauled Nathan up over the log. "Naomi, help your brother! You have to keep going! Go to Mr. Paine's house!" "Mommy, no!" "You have to be brave! Go, I'll be—" Then something snarled behind her, and she was knocked to the ground. She rolled, managing to get free of the thing as it tried to pin her down. Its head swiveled, its neck giving it the appearance of a horrible serpent. She kicked out, connecting with its face. It gave her enough room to crawl back away from it. But as she tried to get to her feet, it leapt, throwing itself through the air and down on top of her. The breath flew from her lungs. Powerful webbed hands held her in place, and jaws slick with blood came toward her. With both hands, she braced at the portion of throat beneath its head and pushed with all her might to keep the teeth from her. Her muscles burned with the effort, and the jaws snapped open and closed. A green drool dripped from the jaws, pattering near her head and hissing against the ground, while it writhed above her. In desperation, she reached one hand past the horrible head and strained for the axe. Her hand ran over its fetid flesh and came away coated in slime. Still, she reached and finally caught hold of the axe head. Her grip was weak, her hands slickened by its ooze, but still she gripped the axe head and jerked it. It remained lodged in the disgusting flesh, but the motion caused the thing to jerk with pain and raise its head up with a cry. She gained a moment's reprieve, but the thing held her steady and shoved her down so that her head smacked the pavement, and it came at her with a new ferocity. That's when she sensed something above them both. A deep-throated battle cry rang out. The thing shrieked and this time scrambled away from her. To her right, she saw a work boot planted firmly on the ground. Mr.Paine stood above her, his grim expression illuminated by the lightning above as he held the axe in a ready posture. "Get on up!" he bellowed. "Got them kids squared away! Gotta get you too!" The thing stalked back and forth, hissing with rage, planning its next strike. She clambered to her feet. Her ears rang from the blow to her head, and the world seemed to swim. She had to fight to keep the present in focus. Then it sprang at them. Mr.Paine interposed himself between her and the thing. He swung the axe overhead and caught it again in the wounded shoulder as it charged. It shrieked with renewed agony as dark blood spurted from the spot. But this time it did not retreat. Instead, it whipped around, long tail swinging out and clearing Mr.Paine's legs from beneath. The big man went down hard, and the axe flew from his grip. Then it was on him, teeth sinking deep into one arm as the man screamed and beat at it with his fist. For a moment, she stood there, still disoriented and not quite grasping what she was seeing. The thing jerked back and forth like a dog and slung Mr.Paine into the broken branches of a fallen tree. He did not rise. Again, the sightless face turned on her. No more tricks, that look seemed to say. No more running. She looked to the axe, knew she wouldn't be fast enough to reach it. Somehow she imagined that the thing knew this too, and that its bared fangs were a triumphant grin. It hunched, coiled itself, and then something flew through the air and struck it in the head. "Hey! Over here!" Both she and the thing looked in the direction of the voice. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, but leaned heavily against a fallen tree, dripping blood from innumerable wounds, was Jonathan. He reached for another object to throw, stumbled. He could barely stand. The thing roared and stamped its webbed feet, turning to face this new attacker. Then it charged. Elaine reacted on pure instinct, and this time she did not freeze. As the creature took off, she ran for the axe and took it up. She followed in the thing's wake, but felt so slow. It was on Jonathan. He had grabbed a large limb for a meager defense, but the beast swatted it away and scored him with its claws. Jonathan wailed and fell back. The thing came down with open jaws. And she struck it, just behind the bony plate protecting the front of its head. It jerked. Instinctively, it wheeled about, snapping at her. Deeply lodged as it was, the movement pulled the axe from her hand. She backed away, and the thing came on, biting blindly at the air. But the blade seemed to have done its work, for even as it approached, its movements became jerky and palsied. It shook itself this way and that, as if trying to lose the annoying perturbance, before stiffening and collapsing forward. A black tongue lolled from its mouth, and it moved no more. In the following moments, time seemed to come out of focus. Heedless of the wind, she sank down in exhaustion, staring unbelieving at the monstrosity there as the storm continued to rage. Epilogue. You better be getting along. Check on that man of yours, though I do appreciate you keeping me company. Elaine reached out and gave Mr. Paine's hand a squeeze. It was his only one now. Where his right arm should be was only an abscess in the hospital bed. They had not been able to save the savaged arm, but they had saved the man. She thought it nothing short of a miracle. In some ways, they were fortunate. It took only 2 days for aid to reach them, but he had come down with a bad infection that left him comatose for more than a week after the storm. It wasn't clear when he would be released, but with how long it was taking to get things back to normal, she thought it might be for the best. They had made it a point to keep tabs on him during his recovery. All right, I'll get out of your hair. Speaking of Jonathan, he told me to tell you hello. Said he might stop by this evening with something better than hospital food. Oh, I do appreciate it. He's a good one. He is. Say, how are the little ones? The empty platitude, "They're fine," came to her lips, but she swallowed it. They're mending the best they can. Thankfully, they weren't hurt too bad, not even Nathan, if you can believe it. But Mr. Paine finished for her. Sometimes the wounds are on the inside. Yeah. They saw so much. But they got good folks looking out for 'em. They'll be all right in the end, I expect. You got good folks too, you know. He smiled at that, but there was a sadness in it. She suspected he was thinking of his friend from across the river. Jonathan had mentioned finding her corpse in their basement, probably brought there by that thing, but it must have been washed out with the water. She had expected there would be more questions about what happened that night, but as she looked at all the filled hospital beds and all the destruction from the weather, their little nightmare seemed just another drop in the bucket, indistinguishable from all the other tribulations. That is something I'm mighty grateful for, he said after a moment. But go on now, see to your family. Jonathan stood, leaned on a cane, as he watched the activity up the hill. Work crews, mostly volunteers, were clearing the street and helping to get things in order. Mr. Paine had given them permission to use his place while he was in the hospital, and he went each day to check on their house and do what he could to clean the mud from the basement, among other repairs. He wanted to do more, but the word was that he shouldn't be doing anything too taxing for a while longer. He probably shouldn't be up straining himself at all, but he couldn't stand just sitting by. It made him too aware of the pulsing pains. He felt like nothing so much as a bundle of stitches, and it gave him too much time to remember. But he would get past all that. He knew now he was more than capable of staving off the nightmares in life. Thankfully, the kids seemed to be rebounding better than expected. They were both frightened of bad weather now and got nervous at bedtime, though for once he couldn't blame them for wanting someone to check for monsters. But in moments like this, where they romped around in the muddy yard, all those fears seemed far away. They were young, and his sincere hope was that the memories would fade with time. And if not, he knew better than ever how to be there for them. What are you guys doing down here? It was Elaine, apparently back from the hospital. Just hanging out. He kissed her and put an arm around her. How's Paine doing?
He's good. I think he's looking forward to you checking in on him later.
Ah, that's good to hear. Excuse me, sir. Jonathan turned to see a man in a long coat coming down the hill. He'd arrived amid the work crews today and had asked some pointed questions before requesting to have a look around. Jonathan had told him what he could. No one else really seemed to believe or care when he tried to explain their plight. But then there was so much death and destruction. It made him feel like a fraud trying to explain that some weird animal had washed up at the house. Their story only ever met with skepticism. Never mind the fact that everything, the corpses, the weird sacks, had been washed away by rising waters. And would anyone really believe something had burst through the kitchen floor? This man seemed to. Everything all right? Jonathan asked. Fine. I appreciate you letting me have a look around. Wanted to give you this. He held out a card, blank except for a phone number. You see anything strange, give that number a ring, would you? You believe me then? I believe something interesting happened here, though I wouldn't go broadcasting it if I were you. You know how people can be. Yeah, I've noticed. Well, thanks anyway. The man turned to leave.
Who did you say you worked for again?
Jonathan called after him. I didn't, said the man, not slowing or turning.
Who was that?
Elaine asked. I guess, well, I'm not really sure. She leaned against him. Who cares? We've got enough to worry about. That they did. But considering what they had been through, he figured it wouldn't be that bad. They would pick up the pieces. They would keep going.
Whew, I need to catch my breath. The second half was a real thrill ride. I tell you, there's something extra scary about a monster lurking in waist-deep water. It keys into the fear of never knowing how close the jaws are to your body. And hey, how about that mysterious stranger in the long coat, huh? Who do you suppose that was? If I know A.G. Hilton, that character, or the organization he represents, will appear again. If you enjoyed this story, please check out more from this author in the playlist linked on your screen. His most recent story prior to this one, Nameless, will keep you glued to your speaker for a couple hours. Please also leave a like on this video and subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Whatever you do, bring a towel and a pool noodle. And don't fall asleep.